In Islam, the holy month of Ramadan is the month in which the Quran was revealed to the Prophet. Fasting is done to purify the soul, to control your humanly physical desires, so that you get closer to God in a spiritual sense, which is why other acts like drinking or intercourse are prohibited. And when I say drinking, I mean drinking in general, as alcohol is already prohibited in most branches of Islam. Fasting is also done in certain Christian sects in different contexts, where you cannot consume meat or flesh specifically by eating fish, which wasn't considered meat back in ancient times, apparently. In Islam, fasting is also done to sympathize with the less fortunate by experiencing their hunger. Which leads me to Sandman and its 50th issue, Ramadan. I always heard about this issue before reading it and how it's the best, or at least the best that is standalone. But when I read it, I wasn't convinced. It wasn't necessarily my favorite. And to be honest, it still isn't my favorite. There's probably a dozen issues that I like more than it, but after looking into it and reading it more times, I can't help but love it. Everything about it, from the writing to the setting, the references to Arabian Nights and the concept and everything. And don't get me started with the art. I saw a comment from a message board from like 2011 which described it. And yeah, I think that's exactly it. The story is framed like and in reference to Arabian Nights or 1001 Nights, in order to invoke the very concept of it, as almost in homage to it being its predecessor. Just like Sandman, Arabian Nights is a story about stories and the power of stories. If you were one of the people who only knows about Arabian Nights from Aladdin, well, that was one tale in a large anthology. 1001 Nights is about this king from somewhere in the Middle East, probably in Persia, or maybe Western India, who's been cheated on. So he decides to end game his wife and then marry a virgin every day and game end them in the morning after, due to his paranoia of women cheating on him and women in general. He is basically an incel. His visor, who is in charge of the whole operation with the woman, runs out of virgins to give him. So in order for him to not be game ended himself next, his daughter volunteers to be his wife, because she knows what's going to happen if she doesn't do something. She tricks the king into letting her tell him stories. But the catch is that she always ends the night on a cliffhanger and starts a new one the next day. Therefore, he can't kill her until she finishes her stories. So she tells him somewhere between 40 to 200 to 500 stories, depending on the version of the book you're reading, and it takes 1001 nights. Shahrazad's power of telling stories, as well as the power of stories themselves, save her, as well as many more women and people. Morpheus as a character feels almost like a combination of the two central figures of the story. He is a king, he is jealous, he is petty, and has treated women horribly throughout the history of, well, humanity, punishing them in ways beyond description. But he is also a king of stories, like Shahrazad. The whole idea of Sandman is a story about stories. World's End is probably my favorite arc due to how it uses different characters trapped in a location at the end of existence to tell stories and stories within stories. I don't know how much influence Arabian Nights had on Sandman, but if it is a coincidence, then it's a big one. Especially since Ramadan itself is almost presented as a tale out of 1001 Nights, using as main character a person who is also in Arabian Nights, Haroun Al Raschid. Sorry if I can't pronounce his name correctly, but he's the Caliph, king of Baghdad, ruler of Persia, Arabia, North Africa, and Spain even, if I'm getting my timelines correctly. He is Prince of the Faithful. In this story, Baghdad is portrayed as a mythical, mystical, magical city, stunningly beautiful in an otherworldly way, filled with mythical creatures and architecture that exists solely in the realm of our imagination, full of pleasures of all kinds, from women to men, from food to alcohol, hallways that go forever, treasures that never end, mechanical puppets, and the phoenix bird laying eggs. It's everything our minds today envision the ancient Orient to be, but also anything that the current Iranian, Iraqi, Arab would dream about as well. It's similar to how the Romans thought of Britannia as this magical place before conquering it, or how we envision it today when we look at it from hundreds, if not thousands of years into the future, with castles and dragons and Excalibur and magic and Merlin and King Arthur. And they go out of their way to tell and show us how magnificent Baghdad is. But that's what makes Haroun feel uneasy. He's seen remains of cities long dead, lost and forgotten, along with their gods worshipped in these places. And that concerns him, for as amazing as it is, one day his city and potentially his god will be forgotten, as if they never existed. So he goes through his castle to the room where he holds 1,000 demons and threatens that he will release them to the world and his city if Morpheus doesn't show up. After showing an annoyed Dream his city, he then asks for Baghdad to live forever, at the cost of being taken into the realm of dreams, so that it stays immortal. But by making it immortal in dreams, imagination, and unconscious of the world, it loses its properties in reality. But if you read the series, you understand that this is a decision that is even deeper than that. And it kind of sends me back to Dream of 1,000 Cats. This story follows a cat telling her fellow cats about a dream where she meets Dream, Morpheus, in cat form, who tells her about a world where cats were in power and how they were once the rulers of the world. But their reign ended when humanity took over through their belief in the idea that they were superior beings. They gathered and forced themselves to believe into it until reality shaped it to be the case, right? Wrong. It's not like their collective dream and belief changed the universe into one where roles are reversed, but it shaped history itself so that humans were always on top. And the old reality is nothing more than a vague dream in the unconscious, maybe. Missy becomes determined to claim this lost power and gathers cats to share her vision of a revolution. She believes that if enough cats dream together, they can restore their rightful place as rulers of Earth.
They dreamed the world, so it was always the way it is now. There was never a world where cats reigned. They changed it from the beginning of all things to the end of time.
This story shows the influence of dreams shaping reality and how belief literally changes the world and its history. While the Baghdad in the story, as magnificent as it is, would still be forgotten and gone eventually, like any city or civilization, now it would live forever in our dreams and imagination as a place of wonders and majesty for the rest of humanity. The stories told about it will last long after any physical building or treasure. Yes, this is the version of Baghdad we all imagine in our Orientalist view. It doesn't matter even if it never existed in reality because it lasts in our minds to this day, and that is as real as anything can be. The title of the story might seem a little strange or weird in some way. From a surface level, it has little to do with Ramadan itself. Yes, the story takes place during it, but it's not the main subject. Wouldn't something like City of Dreams or some Arabian Nights related name fit it better? But when you look at it in a deeper way, this story is almost reliant on Ramadan, and I'm sure the less you know about it, the less meaningful the story is to you. You see, an aspect of the comic I never see brought up is how Haroun acts the whole time. He is supposedly the Prince of the Faithful. Not only a political or military, but a religious leader. Yet we see him surrounded by women and, even more surprisingly, boys in the month of Ramadan. We see him indulging in the most carnal and human desires on the month where he's supposed to be the closest to God. He is supposedly a follower of God, but he almost unleashes thousands of demons and evil spirits on the children of Adam and Eve, as he himself puts it. It's never more clear than in the three interactions between him and Morpheus. The first time, Haroun asks for wine, to which Dream points out that it is haram and especially forbidden during Ramadan, when you are supposed to fast, but Haroun brushes it off. The second time, Haroun proposes a bargain in the palace, which Dream points out is supposed to be a place of faith, and bargains are only done in the market. And finally, the third time, Haroun buys grapes from the market and eats them, though, as I already mentioned, you should be fasting during Ramadan. In this story, Haroun seems to be more concerned and occupied with the physical aspects, with the luxuries, with qualities of the city than the spiritual religious obligations to his faith, while still mentioning and boasting the name of Allah at every turn. So in the end of the story, there is this irony of him, after occupying himself with the physical and not spiritual, to end up living in a more normal, realistic version of Baghdad, while the fantastic version is taken into a non-physical realm by Dream. It is also important to state the importance of stories. As already presented with the 3 times Dream challenges the king, this issue is trying to use the magic number of 3 to invoke a sense of folklore or it being a tale. This number being a staple in storytelling since the day of old till today.
Of all the numbers in fairy tales, 3 is by far the most common in any part of the world. It's a prime number that can only be divided by itself, which makes 3 unbreakable in a sense. And in many ways, 3 has become the number symbolic of power. In Christianity, 3 is the number of the Holy Trinity. In storytelling, 3 symbolizes the perfect narrative structure, a beginning, middle, and end. Goldilocks and her 3 bears, the 3 little pigs, and the 3 billy goats gruff. Fairy tales' wishes often come in 3s. Cinderella stories all over the world often feature 3 balls for the heroine to attend in 3 gorgeous dresses. Hans Christian Andersen's Little Mermaid had 3 days to woo her prince to fall in love with her, and just how many fairy tale royals have 3 children? But triads are not always fortuitous. Sometimes a hero must complete 3 deadly tasks to prove his worth. Other times a protagonist must survive 3 trials or assassination attempts, like the evil queen's 3 attempts to kill little Snow White. Clearly, the number 3 has a strong association with fortune, but it can also represent death and danger. The 3 fates in Greek mythology come to mind: a triple representing past, present, and future.
The number 3 is present from the start of the comic, with the 3 religions, or how aspects of the palace are presented in 3 parts, as well as the 3 doors that Haroun has to unlock before getting to the ball of demons. Stories are also important because they represent dreams and hopes. At the end of this tale, we are revealed that it is told to a child by a beggar in current-day Baghdad, a city destroyed by war. However, the tale inspires the kid, giving him hope of this Baghdad that only exists in dreams, someday becoming reality. And just like the king wished, even though the physical city is in ruins, the city he knew, the city he made, is still alive, existing in the hopes and dreams of people everywhere. And this is more funny than anything, but I appreciate the irony of the dialogue exchange where Dream and Haroun invoke the story of the genie and the fisherman. Dream revokes Haroun's implication by saying that, unlike the genie in the tale, he is neither foolish, boastful, or lonely, which by reading the comic, you know that he's all of those things at different points in times. But perhaps the biggest irony here is that the genie was put in a bottle, and Dream negates that he's a genie in a bottle. But this is exactly what will happen to him in around 1300 years. So that is pretty funny as well.